Thank you very much, Libby. As far as that poem, I was reminded this morning I was out trimming some dead flowers off the cosmos plants that I had planted, and that way that'll continue blossoming. And I found a bunch of seeds for next year, and I was thinking, I just spotted them by looking, and I was kind of transported me to another season, and planting them for next year. So anyway, that's kind of where that poem landed with me. Good afternoon, everyone. This is quite an opportunity. You'll get a little glimpse into my life, past and present. When Libby asked me to do this, initially I thought, elder, what does that mean to me? And I came up with someone who's been involved with a certain community, this church, for some time, and has a little bit of experience with the goings on, and it fit. And yes, as much as I hate to admit it, you have to be of a certain age, but I loved Libby's definition. If you're older than Sherry, you can be an elder. So let me see. I am the oldest of the second litter of Irv Macy and Ruth Stickney. Let me explain a little bit about that. They were married in 1941, shortly after Irv joined the Navy. And the couple were true New Englanders. My dad was an only child from Boston, and my mother had just one sister and lived in Nashua, New Hampshire. Irv and Ruth's first child, a girl named Lee, was born in 45, and then a couple years later, a boy, Gil, was born. During these years, they lived all around the world because of Dad's naval career, and lived in Italy and California and Maryland, just to name a few. They were a happy family of four for 11 years. And that's when the second litter appeared. I was born in 1958, followed by two boys 3 and 6 years later. Sometime in there, my dad retired from the Navy after 20 years and started working for General Electric as a logistician. My first 4 years were lived in Lexington, Massachusetts, and then we moved to a Philadelphia suburb where I stayed through high school. We're often asked in church settings, who in the room is a lifelong UU? I'm one of those that raises their hands. We are members of Mainline Unitarian Church in Devon, Pennsylvania. And some of you may know that's one of the larger churches in our denomination as well. At a young age, I knew my parents were really involved with the church. I would witness phone calls and committee meetings, and even the minutes being typed up, complete with carbon paper. Their close friends were from the church, and they had a good relationship, appeared to have a good relationship with the minister. I enjoyed my Sunday RE classes. The church was built on a beautiful old estate, and the classrooms were held in the main house in the second floor. And after church school, we would descend this gorgeous staircase and see the adults standing there clutching their coffee and having, marvelous engaged conversations. It was such a warm, fuzzy feeling for me. I was home there. Abruptly, in junior high school, we left Mainline Unitarian Church. It was one of those decisions that as a kid, you don't get a say in it. It just happens. So our family started attending an American Baptist church. I became active in the youth program and made lots of friends. The RE classes had a fair amount of God language, which I really didn't connect with, but I enjoyed the people and felt a friendship and a kindness and plenty of generosity at that church. My years in Pennsylvania were happy ones. As a youngster, I didn't really know my older brother and sister. They were a mystery to me, and then they went off to college. So at 11 and 13 years older than I was. You know, they were just these older relatives. My pals were my younger brothers, Peter and Scott. We lived 2 blocks from the train station, and we'd, in the evenings, the 3 of us would walk down to greet my dad as he came off the train from his workday in Philadelphia. My dad was a very pleasant man, not one really to raise his voice often. My mother had a little more fire in her. We had lots of friends in the neighborhood, and time outside was spent playing organized football, kickball, baseball games. I loved riding my bike and climbing trees. Real tomboy. It was at this time that I made one of my lifelong friends, Chrissy, who I share an identical birthday with, and we managed to celebrate every year together. I loved going to her house because it was so different than mine. There was live music all the time because her siblings played stringed instruments, and it was just a lovely experience. It wasn't better or worse than mine. It was just a really nice experience. I also loved having pets. At one time, I had quite a collection of mice and gerbils, and I had to be responsible for cleaning those cages and keeping my bedroom door shut from the family cats. Didn't always work out 100%, but I learned. And yeah, I loved having those little rodents. One of the hardest parts about my childhood, which in retrospect is minimal, was that I had older parents. So my mom was 40, my dad 43 when I was born, and then they went on to have 2 more kids. And I didn't feel like I fit in with my friends because of that, because their parents were doing other things than my parents were. But, you know, there's always something to resent your parents for. So in the big scheme of things, it's nothing. And I also realized as I got older that what a gift it was for them to have younger kids, because it really kept them active. Our summer vacations, we almost always went to New Hampshire. We tented, and then as tenting got too taxing for my parents, we bought a pop-up camper. And we would continue to camp throughout, you know, my high school. I remember camping and just loving it. And to this day, I love sleeping outdoors. I realize I really haven't mentioned school. I was an average student, B's and C's, even had to go to summer school a couple times, usually in math, I think. I was more interested in my friends than my studies. But as high school started to come to a close, I realized that I needed to start thinking about college and what I might study. At that point, my older siblings were well on their paths, and I'd often overhear my parents talking about Lee and Gil and the choices they were making, and could really kind of pick up on an approval or disapproval tone they might be carrying. Success was a real important thing to them. My interests leaned toward science, mainly the biology side of science, and I learned about a small field of laboratory work called cytology, which I found interesting. That cytology is the study of cells, if you're not familiar with it, and a cytotechnologist would examine a slide of cells that had been stained, examined under a microscope to check for abnormalities and cancer. I found a straight path to that profession, 2 years at Colby Sawyer College in New Hampshire, followed by a 1-year certificate program at Northeastern University in Boston. I felt I was really lucky to know what I wanted to be, because so many of my friends really didn't have a clue. During my college years, my father retired from GE, and they moved to Plymouth, New Hampshire with my high school aged brothers. As soon as I got the certificate in cytotechnology, I got a job right in Boston at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, which coincidentally my mother had graduated from decades before as a nurse. Living in Boston was great. With few responsibilities and a good paying job, I explored a lot I didn't have a car, but the tea was right there and I felt free to come and go. One particular New Year's Eve, I went to a gathering and met a man named John Farrell. He seemed nice and lived in Florida. We were there with other people. We boiled lobsters together. That was it. He will show up later. I took the bus from Boston to Plymouth frequently for weekend visits. It was at that time my parents started attending some different UU churches. There were a few, but they were a bit of a drive, so they couldn't really get a consistency in going. So they decided to put an ad in the local paper seeking individuals interested in forming a UU fellowship. 18 people responded and began meeting in my parents' home. 40 years later, Star King Unitarian Universalist Fellowship remains an active and vibrant part of the Plymouth community. I feel really proud of them for that. During my time at Colby Sawyer, I made another lifelong friend, Kim. Her independence was amazing to me. She introduced me to world travel, and as she spent time traveling, she did a lot of it in Kenya and East Africa. I was fascinated by her story. It was so unlike mine. She called her mother by her first name and had an adopted Korean brother and lived at a home for troubled boys where her mother was a social worker. After 5 years in Boston, I moved to Concord, New Hampshire. Knew a few people there, and it was a nice sized city. It is the capital of New Hampshire and very comfortable to know, but I needed a car. I loved Boston, but I did feel it was time to move on and challenge myself a bit. I got an apartment and the only cytology position at Concord Hospital, and I did have a few friends in the area. One particular time that I was visiting them, their friend, John Farrell, was over. He had recently moved from Florida to New Hampshire with his job in 3M. This time there was a mutual attraction. We started dating, excuse me. Excuse me. We started dating, and he bought a house in Concord, just a little bit from where I was living. He did that in September, and then in October, we started talking about marriage. So it was a fairly quick, obvious choice. Let me see. We shared a lot of interests, including foods and friends, and mutual interest in Prairie Home Companion, an old radio show, not that old, but I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. We were married in 1985, and he came from a really large family. He has 7 siblings, multiple aunts and uncles and cousins. I needed a chart to try and follow who everybody was. My family had been so tiny, and here were so many relatives. A minister from the American Baptist Church that I had attended in Pennsylvania, who had relocated in New England, married us in a small New Hampshire community church. John's religious upbringing was pure Catholic, though he hadn't been practicing for many years. He was very comfortable in the community church, though we suspected his parents were less happy. That did not prevent Peg and Frank generously welcoming me into the clan. John's business was in sales, and New England was his territory, so he traveled quite a bit. We lived in Bow, New Hampshire, which is right outside of Concord. Our first son, Owen, was born 13 months after our marriage. These were very happy times. I loved being a mother, and I felt strengthened. I felt like it strengthened my relationship with my mom. We saw my parents a lot, and I have special memories of my dad feeding baby Owen his baby food, and my mother exclaiming, "Irv, you never fed our children." My father died shortly after that time at 72. He was way too young. As a mother, I switched to part-time cytology work, as well as started teaching a prenatal postpartum fitness class. I really enjoyed being around new mothers and mothers-to-be. There was so much to learn from them. In 1989, a second son came into our lives, Kevin. They looked so similar. I would refer to them as Pete and Repeat. Shortly, 3 years after that, Kara was born, our daughter, and I distinctly remember feeling so complete after we had her in our family. The three children looked so similar with a head full of dark hair. I'm glad I put a year on the back of their photos so I could tell the difference. Our 10 years in New Hampshire were filled with great friends and lots of family and fun times. John had many cousins in the Lakes region, and we would often go up there on the weekends in the summer to boat and swim, and in the winter to, enjoy the winter snow. When Kara was a few months old, John's sales territory moved to upstate New York. It was a very difficult time for me to leave my mother and the great life we had there. John, baby Kara, and I made a fact-finding trip out here to find a spot to live. We settled on the Rochester area and found a house in Mendon. It was a neighborhood that had lots of swing sets and people out walking, and it turned out to be a really good choice, though it took me a few months to feel happy again. I was afraid that was going to happen. Somebody texted me, sorry. Yeah, in Mendon. I remember sobbing to a friend of mine and telling her that, I couldn't envision being happy here. And she asked me to list 3 things that I liked about Rochester, and really I could only come up with one. The kids really helped me get through that dark time. At some point, I realized that I had to be there for them, so I got involved in their worlds. Owen was in 2nd grade, so I helped out in his classroom, and Kev was still in preschool, and Kara was a toddler. We joined the Y and took some classes there. I eventually started teaching a prenatal and postpartum fitness class there. Our neighborhood was filled with families similar to ours, and I especially connected with 2 women, ironically having the same names as my mother and my mother-in-law, Peggy and Ruth. With John's traveling, we didn't have a lot of us time, but we did make a point of checking in the evenings when he was out of town, which I always looked forward to. He loved being with the kids too, so we spent our time being a family unit. Having come from a large family, he didn't witness a whole lot of couple time from his parents, and I really hadn't either. It was a busy time in our household. In New Hampshire, we had initiated a Thanksgiving event and invited as many family members that would come. Of course, it was primarily Farrells that attended. John and I figured we preferred cooking over traveling, so we invited everybody. The tradition really took shape in New York. Every other year, we would host and have 50 plus. There were hotels within a few miles of our house, and most people would stay there. Young families with kids would, be able to have a place that was quiet to do nap time or enjoy the pool at the hotel. People would generally start coming on Tuesday before the holiday and generally be gone by Sunday. Of course, we usually had a few stray college students on the floor or young adults who didn't want to pay the hotel prices. It took a lot of planning with spreadsheets of who brought what and when, from flatware to pies. But we always seemed to make it work. Some years were very cold and blizzardy, other years were balmy. It was a wonderful, wonderful tradition. In 1997, my siblings and I decided to move my mother, who was still in New Hampshire, out to the Rochester area. She was 79 and out of her home by then. Her UU community was still a big part of her life, so I visited First Unitarian when she came out with her a couple times. She didn't like the distance. It was about a half-hour drive from where she was living. So she told me I ought to start my own church. After all, they had. Coincidentally, the UUA's General Assembly that year was, or in 1998, was held in Rochester. So her minister from Plymouth was out here attending and got to see my mom. That was amazing. We moved her to a facility 7 miles from our house, and at that time it was a financial gamble given the cost of what money she had, but I'm so glad we did it. Being reunited with her was fantastic, and our kids remember a little bit of Grandma Ruth. It lasted a short 9 months, and they were wonderful months until she succumbed to lung cancer. As our kids grew, I felt a draw to find a religious home. Many families we spent time with in Mendon were attending a Catholic church that was within walking distance. We checked it out a little bit, but my inclination was to come to Rochester's First Unitarian. At that time, there was a family service. Some of you may remember that. And the family service was held before the adult one. The MRE was great, and I connected with her, Helena Chapin, why did I say Davis? Yeah, she was wonderful for our kids. She knew how to talk to them and give them jobs that were age appropriate for the service. And it was important for me to make sure the 3 kids were happy there. I knew I would be, and John was a willing participant. Our lives were full then. Kids grew. All 3 introduced me to new things. I became a wrestling mom and a cross-country ski mom and an Irish dance mom. I loved witnessing their growth. And I started back as a cytotech at a hospital in Clifton Springs, New York, part-time. And First Unitarian was added to our lives. Because of the distance, it was about a 25-minute drive. We felt once a week was about all we could do. This prevented us from getting too involved. I was curious, though, about all the offerings their church had. We did send all 3 kids to Unirondack, which they really liked. As the years went on and the kids became college-age kids, John and I started talking about what might be next for us. We would want a smaller home, and being close to the city of Rochester would be nice. Though he was still in sales, his job had shifted to another company by then. He had more local business, so was around a little more. We liked coming into Rochester and attending occasional Jiva show or go to the Little Theater, and of course going to the public market. Plus, I felt a deeper connection to humanity in Rochester. The suburbs had been perfect for our family at the time, with great schools, a neighborhood for the kids, and lots of open space. I was ready to live in an area where I believe better represents the real world. In 2013, we took a chance and put our house on Craigslist. We decided to give it just 3 months. It sold to a local family who liked the area but needed a larger house. And we found a city house where we are now, built in 1929. About this time, my job in Clifton Springs vanished. I thought I might find another laboratory job at one of the city hospitals eventually, but the timing was good for me to be around home and help settle in. We live close to church now and have plenty of city offerings to take advantage of, many within walking or biking distance. Some of our friends back in Mendon still were shocked that we wanted to move to the big, scary city. Living closer to church has allowed me to jump into many of the different offerings. A few years ago, Reverend Tina opened up an opportunity to some, including me, to be a worship associate. I'd always been a little uncomfortable with public speaking, yet I really wanted to try. This environment proved to be perfect to me, as I'm always feeling held by this community. It's a very forgiving audience. My connection here has deepened because of it. I've been on the board and joined a couple committees. I've taken 2 Wellspring classes and will continue looking for ways to deepen my spirituality. I've enjoyed meditation and found it can take many different forms. I've learned spiritual practice can be done while being on my bike or gardening, as well as sitting quietly in a room. I occasionally help with Sheila's RE classes. She is one of the treasures we have here at church. Her programming enriches our collective kids and nourishes the future that we have ahead of us. You can really see their souls grow when you are with them. An added bonus is to meet some of the kids and their parents. This church community is really important to me. I've seen a lot of changes in the 20 plus years that I've been here. There's been some turbulence as well as some real highs. And I believe that it is the steady people that keep showing up that gives this community strength. For me, the first and 7th principle really ring true. The inherent worth and dignity of all people and the respect for the interdependent web of all existence for which we are a part of. I aspire to live my life that way daily. And luckily, if I mess up, there's another minute. Here in 2020, during this crazy COVID time, I feel very fortunate for all that I have in my life. My husband, John, has great health now and is a happily retired individual. Our 2 sons live fairly close, and we get to see them frequently, being careful not to get too physically close to them. They are healthy and employed. Our daughter lives in Westchester County, downstate, employed as well, and we see her a few times a year. She did have a light case of COVID early on and recovered relatively unscathed. My children, though now adults, still mean the world to me, and I continue to learn from them. We have relatives near and far, and we will gather once we are comfortable doing so. My older sister now lives in California and has just moved into her new home after the car fire destroyed her Reading home 3 years ago. She's turned into a great friend in our adult years. My brother Gil sadly died at age 51. Younger brother Peter is down in the Philadelphia area, not far from where we grew up, and brother Scott lives in Fairbanks, Alaska. And friends, I am rich beyond belief. I was reminded of that 2 days ago when I celebrated my birthday and heard from many people. Something really special happened this last January. I had a special invitation from the church that my parents began to help celebrate their 40th anniversary. My brother Peter and I, along with our significant others, represented the Macy family as a new hall was dedicated in their name. That was March 15th, pretty much the last weekend before life changed drastically with COVID. It was a real honor to be there, and I truly felt my parents' presence during that weekend. A handful of folks who were members when Mom and Dad were there are still around, and it was just great fun to hear the memories and see all the old photographs. Let's see, my health is good. I'm able to take advantage of these beautiful roads we have around Rochester to ride my bike. In 2011, however, I was diagnosed with MS and am fortunate that the attacks that I've had have been few and far between, and I'm medication free. I typically will do an MS bike ride fundraiser this time of year to help fundraise for how harsh this disease can be, and with hopes to find a cure. I'm currently working part-time at Wegmans and can be found at the East Avenue store. My title is cooking coach, which is a role that's kind of morphed over the last few months. Unfortunately, there are no more samples to be handed out. However, cooking techniques and knowledge about the products that we sell will be given. Done a little traveling and hope in retirement to do more. Before marriage, I traveled to Kenya to see my friend, and she also lived in Mexico, so I visited her there. John and I have enjoyed trips to Spain and France and Italy, and also in the US to Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon. Of course, seeing family all over the place happens too, and they are spread out. I do have one sister-in-law who lives in Singapore now, and she's lived in a variety of places in Asia, and we will get over there at some point to have a tour by Meg and Frank. Let's see, I was looking over the questions that Libby had kind of said to cover as guidelines, and I think I've pretty much hit them all. Libby, this has really been a great exercise to revisit people and places in my life, and kind of see some different threads that appear through my 62 years and 2 days. Clearly, family is still really important to me. And thank you very much, Libby.